So what is the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative? So there's a couple of you that had that question. The foundation of the initiative was the identification of priorities by Great Lakes governors in 2003. In Executive Order 13340 was issued in 2004, and the 2005 Great Lakes Regional Collaboration Strategy was published in 2005. This was the foundation of what was to come. President Obama introduced the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative as part of his 2009 spring skinny budget. The GLRI became a reality after that, after extensive public engagement in the spring and summer of that year. And then we got a $475 million appropriation in October to get things started. Prior to that time, the Great Lakes office was getting a $60 million appropriation. The GLRI is intended to accelerate efforts to protect and restore the Great Lakes. It's the monumental turning point in our efforts to restore and protect them. Next slide. Another turning point came with Clean Water Act amendments in December of 2015 and 2016, which provided statutory GLRI authorization. Prior to that, we were just a creature of appropriations law. Clean Water Act was amended again in January of 2021 to authorize GLRI funding through FY 2026. The new authorization starts at $375 million in FY 22 and increases by $25 million each year to $475 million for FY 2026. Do note that this is only an authorization. It doesn't become real until it's appropriated. The last full appropriation for GLRI was for $330 million for FY 2021. Currently, we are under a continuing resolution. But we now also have the infrastructure law, which provides an additional $200 million annually from FY 22 through FY 26. Next slide, please. The GLRI is a multi-agency effort of a regional working group that's coordinated by EPA across 16 federal agencies representing 11 departments. You can find the full listing of federal agencies on the GLRI.US partners page. You can find contacts for each agency by selecting the Contact Us tab in the upper right corner of each of the GLRI.US pages. If you want to get a hold of someone with the agencies, remember that it's a good resource to have. EPA coordination is done by my office, the Great Lakes National Program Office, or GLNPO. I may refer to it by that acronym from time to time. The executive order effectively placed GLNPO as the lead for the regional working group. This is a federally funded initiative, but our partnerships with states, tribes, local governments, NGOs, industry, and citizens are key to the GLRI's success. Next slide. So how does the work get done? Well, GLRI is a voluntary program. It's not a regulatory program. Funding helps. Congress has appropriated $3.8 million to EPA for GLRI since it began. That includes an FY21 appropriation of $330 million that I had mentioned earlier. GLNPO gets the appropriated funds, then uses interagency agreements to provide over half of these funds to other federal agencies. Each agency, including EPA, uses the funds for contracts or grants to do the work of the initiative. Those contracts and grants fund projects. As the agencies announce competitive grant opportunities, we post those opportunities on GLRI.US on our funding page. If you were to go there now, you'd see that there's an announcement for Fish and Wildlife Services Sustain Our Great Lakes program for an $11.2 million offering. Proposals are due there by February of 2025, by February 25th. You'll also see an EPA request for proposals for our biology program. That one is a $3 million offering and the applications for that are due on February 8th. So the GLRI does have some unique features. Under the GLRI, agencies can supplement but not supplant their base funds that they use for Great Lakes work. Agencies are also provided the authority for implementation grants for activities within the scope of the action plan. There are limitations. There's a specific statutory limitation that generally prohibits activities for infrastructure other than green infrastructure. And the GLRI authority is for implementation of action plan activities. That generally means ecological protection and restoration. Next slide. So what are these action plans? GLRI operates on a 5-year strategic planning cycle in which we engage with our stakeholders and lay out the goals and objectives for the program. We're currently in the 3rd year of Action Plan 3, which was issued in October of 2019 and runs through September of 2024. If you want to know what we're doing in GLRI, you look to the action plans. Next slide, please. Over the years, we've operated under an evolving set of principles that have been included in various parts of the action plans. These principles apply to projects across all of our GLRI work. Of particular interest in recent years, I'll note that the principle of project sustainability encourages project plans and designs that are resilient to the effects of climate change. Under this principle, we also encourage project stewardship in order to protect the investments we make now so that progress and successes will be sustained into the future. Next slide, please. We've mentioned focus areas. The focus areas on this slide correspond with congressional priorities for the GLRI. They target the most significant Great Lakes issues. GLNPO has assigned a focus area lead for each of these focus areas. The focus area leads have key coordinating roles to work with the other federal agencies to plan activities, develop budgets, and oversee reporting. Next slide. Largest portion of the GLRI budget, about 35%, supports cleanup of areas of concern in GLRI Focus Area 1. Out of a $320 million budget in FY20, that's about $116 million. Agencies getting that funding include NOAA, Corps of Engineers, Fish and Wildlife, USGS, and EPA. I'm not going to go through that full list of agencies for each of these focus areas. You can see the agencies getting funding on GLRI.us. The next largest portion, about 20%, addresses invasive species such as invasive carp, invasive mussels, and sea lamprey. So out of a $320 million budget, that's about $63 million. About 17% each supports activities to address non-point source pollution and to protect habitats and species. Out of a $320 million budget, that's about $54 million for each of these two focus areas. Finally, about 11%, $35 million, has gone to fund science and education activities in the foundations for future restoration focus areas. Funds these agencies get are for programs and projects that they have identified as being the most important for Great Lakes protection and restoration. Each agency then uses its own authorities, personnel, and funding mechanisms to get the work done. If you want to contact folks with the agencies, remember the Contact Us button that you'll see on the GLRI.us pages. You'll see a list of the agencies there and contacts for each agencies that can tell you more. So I'm going to, at this point, share with you some of the objectives and just a few of the accomplishments within each of the focus areas. Next slide. So we'll start with our focus area 1. We've accomplished quite a bit. Focus Area 1 focuses mainly on cleaning up areas of concern, or AOCs. First identified in 1987, the 31 US or binational AOCs are some of the more highly contaminated areas in the basin. Only one AOC was delisted prior to the GLRI. Since then, we've delisted 5 more. including the Ashtabula, Ohio AOC in 2021. The slide depicts removal of 107 beneficial use impairments at the AOCs. The 97 BUIs that we've removed in the 12 years since the start of GLRI is more than 9 times the total removed in the preceding 22 years. To get to this point, over $1 billion from GLRI has been spent on AOCs, including some $800 million on AOC project spending. Factors and decisions on where and how these funds are used include discussions with states and local communities, and the availability of contributions of non-federal funding. These 2 additional objectives that you see here under this focus area pertain to health information and priority chemicals. Under the GLRI, states and tribes are developing innovative ways to communicate fish consumption guidelines to vulnerable communities who consume Great Lakes fish, communities such as the Asian women of childbearing age in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Next slide, please. Here we have focus area 2, invasive species. The objectives are straightforward: prevention, control, and development of new technologies. Through September of 2020, we've controlled 200,000 acres of aquatic and terrestrial habitat from being degraded by invasive species. We've conducted numerous early detection activities and rapid response exercises, and have also developed new prevention and control technologies. Next slide. Invasive carp leaped literally onto the scene just when GLRI was getting started. We responded by changing some of our planned activities in order to keep them away from Lake Michigan, where they would then spread to all of the Great Lakes. Since then, funds have been used to shrink invasive carp populations in Illinois. GLRI funded contract fishing has removed over 10.5 million pounds of invasive carp near Lake Michigan, reducing the potential for a Great Lakes invasion. Looking at the picture there to the left, some of you may know that gentleman in the middle. That's Chris Korleski, our director, the one holding the big carp there. Next picture, next, please. Focus Area 3 supports a variety of programs to reduce non-point source runoff and associated loadings of sediments, nutrients, and other pollutants to the Great Lakes tributaries in nearshore waters. The primary objective of our work in this area is to reduce phosphorus runoff that contributes to harmful algal blooms in Lake Erie, Saginaw Bay, and Green Bay. Through FY20, projects have prevented over 2 million pounds of phosphorus from entering the Great Lakes. In collaboration with NRCS, GLRI supports farmer outreach and education, demonstration farms, and direct technical or financial assistance to adopt conservation practices on the land. GLRI green infrastructure projects aim to infiltrate stormwater runoff and restore riparian corridors. Through September of 2020, these projects have captured or treated 377 million gallons of stormwater and restored 34 stream miles. Next slide, please. We also support targeted monitoring and assessment studies to understand the effectiveness of non-point source best management practices. For example, we have a network of sites we are monitoring in 4 agricultural priority watersheds: Maumee, Lower Fox, Saginaw, and Genesee Rivers, as shown on this slide. Next slide, please. In focus area 4, we've done extensive habitat restoration work in pursuit of our objectives for habitats and species. We've restored, protected, or enhanced 460,000 acres of habitat through September of 2020. We've also restored 6,000 miles of aquatic connectivity, more than 2.5 times the length of the Mississippi River. Next slide. You're looking at one of the more photogenic success stories for GLRI. GLRI has assisted the recovery of the endangered piping plover through habitat restoration, nest monitoring and protection, and captive rearing. Through these efforts in FY20, we're able to claim piping plovers as our first species benefited success under Action Plan 3. That's one of the measures of progress that we have there. In FY21, we had another species benefited, the lakeside daisy. I don't have a picture of that for you here. We'll be having that on our website soon, and we have stories there about that also on GLRI.us. Next slide, please. Our focus area 5, foundations for future restoration actions, includes education. GLRI education activities aim to increase the knowledge of Great Lakes science and stewardship through hands-on learning experiences, targeting youth in grades K through 12. Typical experiences allow students to discover and explore outside the classroom. Over 75,000 youth have been impacted by these projects through September of 2020. That's over 575,000. The slide lists a number of the programs through which they're being implemented. Next, please. Science and monitoring play a critical role influencing where the GLRI work takes place, what gets done, how it gets done, and whether desired outcomes were achieved. It's a part of all the focus areas, but in this particular focus area, we focus on large-scale basin-wide ecosystem monitoring and activities that cut across or support multiple focus areas. One such area is our long-term ecosystem monitoring program. We've included a picture of GLNPO's research vessel, the Lake Guardian, which is used for conducting a number of our long-term monitoring programs. GLRI supporting science efforts are planned by a group of 10 federal agencies with input from state partners. Efforts support work such as assessment of HABs and nuisance algae, mapping of lake bottoms and hardened shorelines, and modeling of coastal resiliency. The work produces models, decision support tools, and maps that can help Great Lakes resource managers in planning and restoration. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned our website before. Do please go there, explore. You can get more information there. There's a wealth of additional information, including information about the more than 6,000 projects that we've funded under GLRI. Next slide, please. I'll stop for a few questions.
Thanks, Mike. So we have one question in the chat. So asking, could you discuss the role of BIA and tribal capacity funding, which has been really important here for the tribal communities on Lake Superior?
Yeah, BIA is one of our key partners. In the last couple of years, we have established a distinct tribal program with BIA. And we work with them in partnership. BIA works then extensively with the other federal agencies and us and the tribes in identifying projects for us working together to protect and restore the Great Lakes. I believe BIA currently has an offering out to the Great Lakes tribes to identify proposals that the tribes would have for work in FY22. So that's out there. And Zach Jorgensen is one of the key players with that. But they are a key player working with us. There's been approximately $15 million that's been basically set aside for BIA to work with tribes each year to fund tribal projects in support of GLRI activities.
Let's see. So one more question, and then I think we'll move to Liz's presentation. So let's see here. So this one says GLRI has helped achieve many local improvements, but in government progress reporting at the Lakewide scale, most lakes are rated as unchanging. So what are some of the benchmarks for the education aspects of GLRI so we can measure or show that there is public awareness of the GLRI and its role in material improvements to the lakes at local and regional scales. I don't know if you captured that.
So couple things. I would like to, we are always looking to find better ways to engage with the public and to have success there. I think that the metric that was referenced there is coming from our State of the Lakes reporting. Under our action plan, we are tracking things like number of students. And so we've got good metrics there. I'd have to refer you to Beth Hinchy and Nicole Singleton from our program to get into detail on other aspects impacting education. And Liz may be able to get into some of that too, as she's talking about what's going on in Lake Superior.
Great, thank you. So we're gonna hold all other questions until after Elizabeth's presentation. So let's see, hopefully you can see that now, Liz.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Can you hear me
great.
okay?
Yep, sounds great. And I'm just going to pin your video. If you'd like to have your video on, that's up to you. And yeah, feel free to go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Liz Plant. I am the US EPA.
Oh, Liz, your audio is cutting in and out, at least on my end, fading a bit.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is that better? Okay.
Yes.
This is a brand new computer. I think they're having Zoom problems on it. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Liz LaPlante. I'm the US EPA Great Lakes National Program Lake Superior Manager. I am a colleague of Mike, and we've worked together for many years. And Aaron, let me know if you are having any trouble with the audio. Just break in. Okay, next slide. So today, I'm going to very quickly go through first, what is Lakewide management? What is the Lake Superior LAMP? What actions do we take under that? What are the stressors right now on Lake Superior? How are we addressing those stressors? What are the actions we're taking? And then hopefully I can join up with what Mike said with how the Lake Superior LAMP fits into GLRI. So next slide. So first, let me talk briefly about Lakewide management. I'll try to not get too bureaucratic on this. Next slide. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, the purpose is to restore, maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the waters of the Great Lakes. It originally dated back to 1972 under President Nixon and Prime Minister Trudeau. The agreement has actually contributed to many accomplishments in restoring and protecting the Great Lakes. The latest iteration of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement was in 2012. You can see the signing ceremony here. I think some of the changes that are notable is that more public education outreach and input from the public was elevated in this Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, as well as elevating what we call the Lakewide Action and Management Plans, or LAMP, in the process. Next slide. So first off, there are 10 annexes of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. Annex is just another way of saying chapters. So simply, there are 10 chapters that help guide the efforts that are needed. The Lakewide Management Annex, which I'll talk about today, is number 2. And this is where we look at all of the rest of the Great Lakes issues from a lake by lake perspective. So this is where we look at the chemicals, the nutrients, groundwater, everything. That's under the Lakewide Management Annex. So if the GLRI is, I always looked at it as kind of an Uber LAMP. These are the mini GLRIs, or, at a lake by lake basis. Next slide, please. So Lakewide management, it's a process, and the 3 questions we're always asking ourselves on the lake level is, how is the lake doing? What is stressing the lake, and what actions do we have to take to restore and protect the lake. So we also help coordinate all of the actions that need to be taken on a binational level. We also track the progress and challenges on a lake level. So we not just take the actions, but we track them and how is it going. Next slide. The lake partnerships, which I'll talk about more in a second, are members that represent all the entities that Mike was actually just talking about: federal, indigenous, tribal, state, provincial, local governments, and watershed agencies. But with active and participation from academia, researchers, NGOs, businesses, and especially the public. And it's co-chaired by Environment and Climate Change Canada and EPA. Next slide. So in the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, there are 9 general objectives. I won't go through these, but these are all the usual suspects. This is how we monitor if we're, how we're doing on each lake. What's the drinking water status? What's going on with algae blooms, et cetera, et cetera. So next slide. So what are the LAMPs? These are binational management ecosystem-based strategies for protecting and restoring the lake at the lake level. So if you need to describe this to your grandmother, your grandfather, it's basically, what is the plan for how we're going to protect each of the lakes? What are we doing about climate change? What are we doing about invasive species? That's what the LAMPs are. They are prepared for the Great Lakes on a 5-year cycle. So it's a document. So when you hear LAMP, you think document. Lakewide partnerships are the people. Next slide. So how do we implement the LAMP? And I'll go into a little bit more detail about this, but it's really important to know that we build upon existing efforts. So what Mike just talked about is we use the GLRI, the funding mechanism, the GLRI action plan, and we build on those to see how we can restore and protect Lake Superior. The other domestic initiatives that are used are the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, US Clean Water Act, the COA, which is the Canadian Ontario Agreement. These are domestic initiatives, extremely important. That's how we get implementation of the LAMP actions. So there are also many existing national, tribal, state, provincial, other regulations that actively help. I don't have them all here. They are in the LAMP. So LAMP actions are necessary lake-specific work. LAMPs, the documents, they help the partnership, us, the entities, pursue, coordinate projects, allow for tracking, reporting on collective progress and challenges, and help decide the funding. I mean, we have to get these projects and actions funded. And we are very fortunate now to have the GLRI to fund these very high priority actions. Next slide. I already said that. You can skip that. As I mentioned, the partnership. So the Lake Superior partnership is very unique. It's the oldest partnership of all the lakes. Right now, we have representatives from 40 agencies, and we are growing every single year. Just in the last year, I think we've added 2 tribal entities and another federal agency. We work with over 170 organizations, agencies, groups to implement the prior LAMP, which was the 2015-2019 LAMP. We now are in the last stages of finishing the 2020 Lake Superior LAMP. COVID kind of hit us hard. We're a little bit behind, but we are just at the point, we had hoped to release this in 2021 for public review. We're just at the point of releasing this for public review, probably in the next month or 2. Next slide. So in the LAMP itself, what we first do is we talk about how's Lake Superior doing right now. So it's important that, well, first, the conditions of Lake Superior are assessed against, I showed you that prior slide, the 9 general objectives of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. So we are required to assess the status of Lake Superior by those 9 metrics. So from a lakewide perspective, the quality is good in most areas and the ecosystem is good in most areas. Doesn't mean it's good all over though. Lake Superior is the only Great Lake with a food web that's still intact and still dominated by native species, and it's still self-sustaining. However, everything is not good. The lake and the aquatic food web is impacted by chemical pollution. So we still have Lake Superior fish consumption advisories in some area. That's why, if you look on this chart, we assess fish and wildlife consumption as fair. So just a point, there are only 3 metrics here. There's good, fair, and poor. Lake Superior is the only lake that doesn't have any red, poor signals. We have a lot of good and some fair. The fair, as you can see, are the pollutants, the continuing fish advisories, and invasive species. So invasive species for Lake Superior, although it's doing better than the other lakes, we are still working with sea lamprey, zebra mussels, and Phragmites. And just implicit in everything I say today, climate change is one of the biggest stressors to the lake. It undergirds everything I'm talking about today. All the existing stressors are exacerbated by climate change. Next slide. So here's where we get into where we kind of match up really well with the GLRI. So the LAMP identifies threats and corresponding actions. And these areas, as you will notice, kind of line up with what Mike was saying about the different focus areas within the GLRI and the action plan. So our priorities are to reduce chemical contaminants, prevent nutrient bacteria pollution, i.e. nearshore runoff, protect, restore habitat, address invasive species. And then we have this other. So all the lakes are now dealing with plastics, microplastics. Lake Superior's been looking at that actually for years and years. We also have, unfortunately, the risks from oil transport, as we have 2 major oil lines nearby. Lake Superior is also one of the most investigated mining areas in North America. We also have the cumulative stress issues of nearshore areas of a lot of habitat loss, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the other category, don't really line up with the GLRI, and that's okay. So I'm just going to run through very, very quickly snapshots of where we are in Lake Superior. So the takeaway, just look at this, and the takeaway is that chemical contaminant in whole fish, lake trout, from a perfectly average location each year since the 1970s shows a continuing decline in the trend of all contaminants. You can see in the early 70s and 80s, we were only tracking the legacy contaminants of PCBs and mercury. As we've gone on, we've added these emerging contaminants of concern, including PBDEs, PFOS, PFAS, HBCD, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the things now we're moving into and monitoring, and they are chemicals of concern that we highlight in the LAMP. So there is a downward trend, but you might notice that the trend has kind of leveled off in recent years, and it's largely unchanging now. Next slide. So what do we do? So if you look at the LAMP, we have LAMP actions, including AOCs continue to be a huge priority for all the LAMPs. So we need to manage the contaminated sediments. We need to support and look at innovative approaches and technologies, especially for the new and emerging contaminants of concern, including microplastics. We also have a huge focus on PFAS in this LAMP. We have a continuing focus on mercury because that is a source of continuing fish advisories in the lake. And that those trends of mercury have also leveled off. I'm not going to address the actions anyone can take at this point. We don't have a lot of time. So next slide. Nutrient and bacteria pollution. So Lake Superior beaches and water, they continue to provide really good opportunities for swimming and recreation. But many of you know, because many of you are involved in this research, one of the biggest issues happening right now in Lake Superior is algae blooms. They're being cited more and more. The occurrences are more common. We on Lake Superior have set up an algae bloom subgroup. We did that after the State of Lake Superior conference a couple years ago, because there were so many early detection sightings coming up, many researchers raising this issue. So we decided to form algae subgroup. And there's an early warning task force that's associated with this. So sightings of algae blooms have been occurring more and more in some locations. So it's not as big a threat right now as compared to Lake Erie and some of the other lakes, but it's very concerning. Some of you might remember it ended up on the front page of the New York Times 3 or 4 years ago. I opened my paper and saw Brenda LaFrancois, one of our work group members, on the front page of Lake Superior talking about the algae bloom. So it is being driven specifically. So in a lot of the other lakes, it's driven by the farming, the agriculture. It's not the case in Lake Superior. It's driven by climate change, specifically the increase in precipitation. As you can see, that's what this graph is. It's the increasing average amount of annual precipitation in the Great Lakes Basin. So it's being driven by these climate change rains, which are putting more and more of the sediments and the runoff into the lake. At the same time, Lake Superior is one of the fastest warming lakes in the world. So the cooking up of the water temperature with the increased runoff has resulted in these increased algae blooms. Big concern for us. So some of the prevention actions in the LAMP are to advance green infrastructure, which fits in very well with what Michael was talking about in terms of GLRI priorities, and also other nature-based solutions. So what we're trying to do in the LAMP is marry up where the algae blooms are happening with some green infrastructure projects, which then can line up with the GLRI action plan and priorities in there. We also want to improve soil and forest health. It's all about increasing resilience to climate change, trying to plant more trees, more green cover, etc. And I'm going to skip again the actions anyone can take in terms of time. Habitat and species. So again, habitat and species overall are in very good, well, good. We don't have a very good condition from a lake-wide perspective. The aquatic food web is still dominated by native species. If you catch a lake trout, for example, chances are it's wild and not stocked. But the figure on the screen shows you that the areas are not all good around Lake Superior. So we have poor, fair, and good metrics. You can see there's a lot of green around Lake Superior, more so than the other lakes. You look at Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, but there are some real problems. So this shows coastal wetland conditions, and we're using amphibians in this particular case as indicator of health. So better than the lower lakes, still a lot of coastal wetlands in poor conditions. Next slide. So we have 22 actions in the current land to protect habitat and species, and some of them are, again, AOCs, huge, huge priority for us. Restore habitat through land acquisitions, protections, conservations. Lake Superior has what's called a critical habitat map. We're working on the third iteration. This is extremely important because it highlights, focuses on those critical habitat areas that need to be preserved. And we work very closely with our GLRI colleagues in GLNPO to try to match up priorities such as those with the metrics in the GLRI. So it works really well together. Also to undertake science and monitoring to better understand the impacts of a changing climate. Finally, invasive species conditions. So this figure shows the cumulative. This is cumulative. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden in 2014 it went way up. It's the cumulative number of non-native species established in Lake Superior since 1873. Good news is fewer non-native species are finding their way to Lake Superior, but as everyone knows, once they're in, they don't go away. So what we've been trying to do is focus on the sea lamprey, non-native Phragmites, huge problem in Lake Superior, zebra mussel, emerald ash borer. So those are the species that are in causing harm. But again, fewer non-natives are finding their way to Lake Superior, which has been a really good story. Some of our actions, we continue to focus on sea lamprey. We have a lot of actions on elimination of Phragmites, and we do continue to undertake early detection and monitoring. So our other issues, this is the last one, as I mentioned before, is microplastics. But what's really interesting about what's happening on microplastics is we do have a lot of some of the best experts in the lake on any of the Great Lakes that are working on not just prevention, but also ways of capturing the microplastics as they're coming out of the washers and the dryers. So that's really exciting. So the concentrations in Lake Superior are comparable to Lake Michigan, but they're higher than Lake Huron. I did mention we have 2 major oil pipelines and 14 active mines in the Lake Superior Basin. So we have to minimize the risks from accidents. In addition, some of the growing EVs, electric vehicles, are looking for nickel, a lot of nickel composites and am I trying to say deposits around the Lake Superior Basin. That's a potential threat, additional mines opening up, and finally the cumulative effects of a lot of multiple stressors to nearshore areas. So again, undergirding all of this is climate change. So some of the things we're doing to address plastics and risks from oil transport is really trying to prevent and remove plastic pollution. Some of our partners have been working on eliminating single-use plastics. We are trying to make the LAMP objectives and information available for the local land conservancies when they're considering major transportation and resource extraction projects. And finally, again, we do a lot of our coordinated science and monitoring initiative projects that are focused on understanding, especially the cumulative impacts of stressors to Lake Superior. Next slide, we can pass that. And then basically, we are really involved in trying to do outreach as much as we can. We hold 2 public webinars a year to all of our stakeholders. The one in April is a not to be missed because we are going to focus on algae blooms, and we're going to have some of the best experts in any of the Great Lakes on our call in April, and we will publicize that pretty widely. So that's all I have to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. So I'll leave this up for a second in case you all want to get this contact information down. I will say too, everyone who registered for today's webinar will receive a follow-up message with a really quick 3-question evaluation, contact information for our 2 speakers, and some links and other things shared in the chat. So you'll see that coming through. We do have a few questions queued up. I'm going to stop sharing just to make it a little easier to navigate here. So let's see, and these aren't addressed to either of you specifically, but the first one, just backing up, there was a question earlier. Are you weighing in, so maybe this is for Michael, but are you weighing in on the Enbridge proposed rebuilding of their pipeline under the Straits of Mackinac? So I don't know if that means you as in EPA, but
That's probably to me, and we're not.
okay, we're not. Okay.
No, that's not part of our job.
Okay.
There is a provision in the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement that the parties, US and Canada, have to notify the other party and the public if they are thinking about undertaking a major kind of mine or pipeline. I think it's, I don't know the exact language, but it might be mine and pipeline. So it's just a notification, but we do not get involved in that.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then this one kind of relates to the last slide you had up, or second to last slide, Liz. It says, so the IG, there's a little bit of background, I think, before the question. It says the IJC in their most recent triennial assessment called for significant improvements in civic engagement in LAMP development. And it specifically referenced the old Lake Superior Binational Forum. So wondering, so you mentioned the 2 public webinars. Can you share any other public opportunities that have happened or will be anticipated as the new draft comes up? Or if you want to say more about the April event, you could do that too.
Sure, and I didn't tee up this question. This is an excellent question. One of our commitments, and we're very aware of the IJC's letter on that. One of our big commitments under the new water quality agreement is elevate our amount of dialogue with the public, receiving more input, listening to them, getting out information to them. And so what the mechanisms we do that is, one, we solicit input into the LAMP when we were first beginning. We put out a public notice that said, we're starting to write the Lake Superior LAMP. We really welcome your concerns, your comments, and we kind of gave them a list of things to consider and to get us comments ahead of time before we started writing. The second thing is that we are about to go out for a public review of the LAMP. We do really recommend that the public looks at it, they read it. We absolutely consider every comment that comes in, and we assess it and see if we can incorporate it as necessary. 3, we send out a stakeholder letter twice a year saying, this is what we're doing, this is what's going on in Lake Superior, this is what you can anticipate. we have 2 webinars a year. This has been going out on Glenn Announce. We've also been using a lot of social media now. So it'll probably be on Twitter. Our public affairs office does an amazing job now of outputting that. I think we had over 200 people in our last webinar. That is a really excellent way for the public to hear in real time what is going on Lake Superior. So some of the information I presented today is hot off the presses in terms of the state of Great Lakes indicators. Indicators are updated every 3 years. As much as possible, we try to get that information out to the public as soon as possible so they can see in real time what is going on with their lake. Finally, in 2023, we're going to have every 5 years, each lake has a state of lake conference. Ours is the State of Lake Superior Conference, will happen probably in October, definitely in 2023. Not sure where it's going to be yet. That is an amazing opportunity for the public. We realize it's hard to get to. We do, hopefully, if it's in person, we will still Zoom it. If it's online, it's open to the public. It's a lot to take in, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's great. And I'm going to do a shameless plug for the Lake Superior Collaboratives newsletter, which I send out monthly if folks want to sign up. As I learn about LAMP, opportunities for public input, I'll put those in the newsletter there. So we have one more question. Let's see. So it's asked, what types of green infrastructure projects are being used to help manage increased average precipitation?
I'll jump in with a start. If you want to see the type of green infrastructure projects that the GLRI has been funding, you can go to glri.us and the projects there and look. But we do put out requests for applications and some of the projects to fund some of the different projects, and you would look in there to see what sort of work could be funded. But in the past, we have funded bioswales, rain gardens, restored wetlands, just to name a few things that we have done.
Great, thanks. So I don't think, I'm just going to scroll back through here. Not seeing any other questions. Just wanted to thank both of our speakers again, Michael and Elizabeth. Thank you so much for being here. And for folks who, you're here, you saw it, but just you'll get a recording of this if you want to share that out with others who weren't able to attend today. I'll be following up with that by tomorrow, potentially even today. So thanks everybody for coming. We're almost to the noon hour. So I guess we'll say goodbye for now.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much.